Our interview with Emerson was able to show how close the political situation in Brazil mirrors our own in the United States. The elections of 2018 and 2016 were emotionally charged, with Trump and Bolsonaro both running on promises of a return to greatness or restoring family values. To many, they seemed a fresh new candidate, away from the corruption of the past. The election of both was extremely polarizing, causing massive rifts to form in everyday life. Emerson felt this himself when one of his brothers became an open supporter for Bolsonaro, arguing with him and his other siblings until they decided to just ignore him. Emerson said he was surprised in the worst way every month after Bolsonaro was elected. He, and likely many others, never expected Bolsonaro to pose a real threat to democracy, much like ex-President Trump. However, while Trump thinly hid his authoritarian leanings, Bolsonaro was open with his distaste for democracy. Many of his supporters seemed to yearn for the dictatorship, describing it as safer, and when family values were respected. This rise of authoritarianism in Brazil and America is a distressing turn for Emerson, who much preserves to find common ground with others. The fear of a Bolsonaro-led coup is very real as well, especially with his threats of denying a peaceful exchange of power if he loses the upcoming election, something we faced in the January 6th riot. Emerson is also worried about the amount of people who still support Bolsonaro, especially given his hateful beliefs and actions. Emerson still has hope for the future of Brazil, however, a future where Bolsonaro and his hate are forgotten with a return to rationality and unity, where one doesn't have to vote for the lesser evil and can freely discuss politics without devolving into emotionally charged arguments and insults.
So we did our interview with Emerson Braga, a 30-year-old leftist from Brazil. He currently lives in Recife, but he is originally from Fortaleza. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. One of the things that I found to be most stirring about our interview with him is that it was very clear to me that he was scared, and it wasn't manifesting itself as anger or sadness or a loss of hope as it would with a lot of other people, and as I've seen it manifest itself with other people, especially in America and our own political turmoil. But instead it was genuine fear, and he wasn't ashamed of the fear that he was feeling, which was also very unique. So one of the parts that I wanted to discuss most with Emerson was how the election has affected him personally and mentally, rather than just get his perception on the political status of Brazil, since that's something a little bit more objective and less personal. So we talked about his family. Growing up, he said they would have very healthy discussions about politics, and he feels that they're not really able to do that as often anymore. He said that they still have healthy discussions, but they are oftentimes cut short to avoid any escalation or any conflict between himself and his brother, who is a Bolsonaro supporter. I also wanted to know why he personally supported Lula, and just his thought process behind that, because I think it could give a really interesting insight into maybe why other people support Lula or don't support Lula, things like that. And through that, it came out that he actually was really hopeful that a third-party candidate would move into the final election, and he himself was planning on voting for a third-party candidate until the morning of the last round of elections, and he just woke up that morning and decided instead that he was going to vote for Lula. And he said that he doesn't feel strongly that Lula will be as successful as he was in his last presidential term, and he's very nervous about his economic policy. And in speaking about policy, we kind of talked also about what Emerson wants to see for the future of Brazil, because he repeatedly was mentioning the path that Brazil is on. So we kind of asked him about, like, what kind of path would you like to see Brazil be set on? And he said that's really hard to answer without having politicians who kind of give you ideas for what kind of path they see Brazil being on, if that makes sense. So he said that these two politicians, these two opposing candidates, aren't really talking about their policies or what they plan on doing with Brazil in the future. They're more going for those ad hominem attacks against each other, and they are not really sharing with the public what their actual vision is. So he said that it's kind of hard to create your own vision for what the future of your country looks like if those people who are leading it or planning to lead it or hoping to lead it don't even have a vision themselves. Lastly, I think one of the most important points that he made was that even though he is hopeful for the success of Lula, and he is hopeful that if he gets into office, that he is successful in office, he's also fully aware of the fact that even if Bolsonaro does go forward with a peaceful transition of power and does step down peacefully, that doesn't necessarily mean that his followers will do the same. And one of the most important points that he made was that even without Bolsonaro in office, his supporters will still exist, and they will still be emboldened by the words that Bolsonaro has said throughout his presidency, and they will still know that there is a safe haven for them with Bolsonaro and with other Bolsonaro supporters. And I think that's really important to realize, is that this isn't an isolated event with the election. It's more widespread than just this one moment in time, because these people will continue to exist and continue to remember a time where their president supported these harmful and hateful things that they were able to say, and it'll continue no matter who's in office. So I think that was probably my biggest takeaway from Emerson's interview.